Hello, my name is Melanie Nerona. I'm a senior manager of policy and insights at Economist Impact, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our session on finding solutions to Asia Pacific's marine plastic pollution crisis. Now, we'll split this segment into two components. The first will be a one-to-one interview that will help us set the scene a little bit, and the second will be an in-depth panel discussion on the topic. So joining me first is Rana Karadsheh, Regional Industry Director at the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. So I'll be talking to you more about the Economist's research on the topic a little later in this session. But first, I'd like to get Rana's perspective on the plastic pollution crisis in Asia Pacific. So Rana, let's jump right in. Could you help me set the scene a little bit? And tell our audience why plastic pollution is such a problem in the region.
Hi, Melanie, and it's really good to be here. Thanks for the opportunity just to talk briefly on this. So, this situation is in Asia, it's particularly aggravated because of, intense and rapid urbanization. So if you think about it, changing lifestyles, the rising middle class, all of whose consumption in plastic products, convenience products, and single-use packaging is growing. The problem is local infrastructure on waste collection, sorting, and treatment has not kept pace with that. And to top that off, we have a lot of populations that don't have access to regular municipal waste collection services. So there's a lot of indiscriminate dumping of plastic waste. You also have these, sachets, the single-use sachets. 163 million was the figure I had seen in the Philippines. So, and those are very, very hard to sort. And then you top it off with COVID and all of the, from further increased use of masks and packaged food for delivery, really has exacerbated the problem in Asia.
Thank you, Rana. I think you've set the scene really well, sort of explaining the surge in consumption, but where there's also a shortfall on the infrastructure side. So I think to address this issue, we need all the actors to come together, whether it's government, whether it's private sector action on this issue as well. I want to focus a little bit more on the latter. Could you tell me a little bit more about what economic opportunities you think are available for the private sector to get more involved in tackling marine plastic pollution?
So this is really a growing field. It's a bit new, but let me just kind of give you a big picture. The private sector is everything associated with the ocean. We've estimated to be we've seen figures somewhere around 1.5 trillion, right? So the private sector is really embedded in a lot of activities associated with the ocean. So this is in terms of marine fisheries, ocean shipping, offshore wind, tourism, aquaculture. And so it's embedded in there. So there's a lot of opportunities. And the expectation is this will go to 3 trillion. So I think one thing that we need to do is take a step back and say, okay, just honing in on plastics, right? We need to look at it, take steps to increase value rather than just managing as a waste. We need to go from the origin as well as, at the end at the waste component. So you need to look at it at both ends of the spectrum. Just to give you some perspective on that, the World Bank had recently done a study for Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And it shows that in general, in those countries, less than 25 to 30% of used plastic is available for recycling is being processed into valuable materials. And so that itself translates into about 9 billion just in those ASEAN countries of lost opportunities. So what we're saying is that even if a fraction of this untapped material could be used to recover via reuse or recycling, it'd be a meaningful business opportunity. So we're seeing a lot of people focus on this. This is new and growing, but I think it's important, and I think it's important to send that message out.
That's a really good point, and I see that there are opportunities really across the value chain. From what you're seeing and from the studies that you've done, are you seeing investor interest in some of those areas more than others, or where do you think it's really lacking?
So I would say, Melody, it's still kind of growing across the board. We're not seeing investors' interest in more than one place or the other. So, IFC recently supported, Indorama Ventures with our first blue loan in their efforts to increase the volume of PET recycled material in their manufacturing process. And so we provided a $300 million loan for them. And I think that was really notable. We are also supporting companies that are looking at waste collection management. So on the production side and on the sorting side. So I would say there's not so much one that's emerging more than the others, but those are some of the examples. The issue on the recycling and trying to increase it, the issue that we're facing across Asia, it's very dispersed, it's very small, it's very disaggregated. So I think the message we're trying to say is jointly with the bank and with governments, you have the private sector and public sector, they need to come together collectively to come up with a holistic solution. It's not going to be just a one side is only a solution provider. But part of the message that we are trying to send as ISC that works with the private sector in finding solutions is that there are opportunities there. There are economic opportunities to do that. We've seen some, we've done some, but there still is quite a bit more to do.
So what do you think then can be done to encourage more private sector investment? Yes, coming together is good. Do we need certain government policies in place? Do we need some sort of risk sharing agreements? What do you think will really get more private sector investment in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I think, yes, all of the above. But let me say, going back again, I think this is really going to be a holistic solution, right? This is a nascent space. So we need to have enabling policies, right? So you see a lot of countries moving towards the ban of single-use plastics. There are EPRs, which most of us know as extended producer responsibility schemes, right? And you need to tailor that to each country so that the producers and importers of plastic products are also responsible for funding the end-of-life waste management. And this will help take pressure off the cities, right? So, but to do that, you need to kind of come in with governments and with the World Bank to support, right? So from the World Bank side, we can also support policy that help, right? So that will help improve sorting efficiencies, setting standards for recycled content, design for recycling packages. Then on the financing side, so there's the schemes available. There is the policies that you need to put in place. There is what the public needs and how you can support them. But then there's on the financing side, certainly there are schemes that governments and the World Bank and IFC are looking at, which would be things like guarantees as appropriate, blended finance to help improve the economics of these projects, and other de-risking mechanisms that we could use for some of these early movers. These tools are certainly there, and the World Bank is ready to leverage these tools as we start to see this market develop.
That's great, Rana. Thank you again for highlighting the range of tools that are available. But just a quick follow-up on that. Do you see any reason why these guarantees are not being applied in more projects?
Well, I think going back again to what I was saying, it's a nation space, right? So right now we need to tailor them. So these studies came out from the World Bank to try to give us a baseline of where we are in this country. So first we need to start with where are we? What does the situation look like in a particular country? What is the level of waste that's that we're observing? Then where are the gaps? And then once you identify those gaps, you start to set policies to bring them. Do we need more sorting? Do we need more recycling capacity? Do we need certain policies in place? When you have that framework in place, then you start to identify where will be the market opportunities. And once you start doing them, you start putting structures together. And from that, we can start bringing in our tools to do that. So I think it is going to be a step-by-step process. But like I said, and what I say at the beginning, what I have been saying along, it requires all parties involved. So you cannot have the government set the policies without input from the private sector, the ones who will potentially be investing, setting up facilities, manufacturing products. So once we have that dialogue in place and we understand what is needed on a per country basis from there, we can start rolling out projects and then start to deploy these schemes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rana, for your insights. We had a really short time with you, but I think you've set the scene really well for our panel discussion coming up next.
Thank you, Melanie.
I'm now pleased to move on to our next session, a panel discussion on finding solutions to Asia Pacific's marine plastic pollution crisis. For those of you who have just joined us, my name is Melanie. I'm a senior manager of policy and insights at Economist Impact, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Now, over half of the plastic waste leaking into the world's oceans comes from 5 countries in Asia, and that's China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And one of the biggest challenges is the underdeveloped waste management infrastructure and the fragmented system in some of the largest countries. And this is particularly challenging as demand for consumer plastics has rapidly increased. And in some countries, they continue to even import waste from other parts of the world. Now, solutions to these plastic pollution challenges need to come really from all angles. So including material science to develop sustainable alternatives to plastic, product design for reuse, as well as enhanced collection and recycling of waste. Now, this requires a collaborative effort from across the plastic value chain. So from producers to consumer goods companies, from policymakers to financial institutions. Now, how each of them contribute and what solutions are available for the Asia Pacific region will be the focus of our discussion today. And to help me with this discussion, I am joined by 3 experienced panelists. So please join me in welcoming Kim C. Lim, Regional Director, International Finance Corporation, Shekhar Mundlay, Group Chief Executive at Suntory Beverage and Food Asia Pacific, and Brooke Donnelly, Chief Executive of the Australian Packaging Covenant Organization. So a warm welcome to all of our panelists here. And for the audience, you will find their full biographies on the screen under this media player. But in the interest of time, I would really like to kick off this discussion. Now, over the course of this discussion, I would like to split the discussion into 2 main parts. So one is covering how government and corporate responsibility must be balanced to tackle this issue. And the second would be building and investing in a waste management system in Asia Pacific. To set the scene and to get us started and better understand some of the challenges that we're dealing with here in this region, I want to go to Kim first. So, Kim, could you tell us why IFC is focusing on addressing marine plastic pollution in Asia Pacific? So what are your main areas of focus in the context of the challenges here in this region?
Thanks, Melanie. The oceans are critical to humanity, right? And I think we have shown statistics that globally 6 billion people rely on the oceans and the waterways for a livelihood. The ocean economy represents about 1.5 trillion US dollars in value, which is approximately 1.5 times the size of the Indonesian economy. So a significant reliance on the oceans. And the health of our oceans are being increasingly threatened by various forms of pollution, and plastic is one of them. So the protecting our marine ecosystems and cleaning up the waterways is a key priority for us at IFC. I think what has happened over the last few years here in Asia is, one, COVID has aggravated the problem. There's more PPEs, there's more plastic bottles from hand sanitizers and sorts that are being disposed improperly, and most of this ends up in a landfill or in the oceans. Also, the rapid urbanization, which is coming on the backs of very rapid growth in Asia, which has been the fastest growing region in the world, has also aggravated the problem. whereby the rising middle class has created a demand for convenience, and single-use plastics is frequently featured in those convenience packaging. So this is something that we're focusing on quite acutely in this region, and we are working with governments. As you said, Melanie, it's an integrated approach. So working with governments, municipalities, private sector, as well as creating consumer awareness about the need to reduce single-use plastics, as well as recycle where possible, and create value out of plastic waste. I think that's a key idea that we need to create an awareness that there is value in plastic waste. Stop that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. I think you've really set the scene so well. And I think the point you highlighted about during the pandemic, the surge we've seen of single-use plastics particularly has really brought more attention to this issue over the past 2 years now. So I want to now shift the focus and get started on this conversation of corporate responsibility and government responsibility. And Shekhar, I'll come to you first. So what do you think is the role of companies such as yours in tackling this plastic pollution issue? What is Suntory doing?
Yeah, so thank you, Melanie. See, Suntory, we have committed that by 2030, we would be using only recyclable material for our plastic bottle. Right? We are a soft drink manufacturer. And one of the things that we have actually pioneered this technology. It's called F2P, flake to preform technology. It's already operational in Japan, and it actually has a 60% smaller CO2 footprint. In a nutshell, you collect clean plastic bottles, they are broken up into flakes, and through these machines, which we have partnered with Husky and all, you convert that directly into a preform, which is then subsequently blown into a bottle. Now, what is the advantage of this versus the conventional way of recycling it? Is that you don't need any chemical intervention. Having said that, this is most effective in a developed economy like Japan, where the essential waste that is collected itself is pretty clean. So I think that's one of our key steps that we're taking. Now, we've started in Southeast Asia, it's a bit different. In Vietnam, for example, we are going to, next year, 5% of our bottles are going to be recycled plastic. In some countries, there is a constraint. So, for example, the regulations don't allow you to use recycled plastic. So that's where we are lobbying the government along with the rest of the players in the industry. And the third most important thing we are doing is we are founding members of an organization called Plastic Recycling Organization, both in Vietnam as well as Thailand, along with other multinationals like other beverage manufacturers, as well as large local organizations. One of the things from our point of view is also, while we look at big corporations like ours, then we will definitely be on the front without a doubt. But I think somewhere the government also needs to get along. For example, a lot of the marine plastic is caused by fishing nets, but that's not an organized industry in that sense. It's okay. I mean, companies like ours or other large companies will obviously participate, will pay a share, etc., etc. But who's going to get those guys? And that's where the government must play a role. And in forums like this, you must highlight that. I mean, sometimes it is obviously the big companies are the obvious. We are visible, we are big, but the reality is, I don't know. I guess IFC would have the data. Most of the plastic pollution in the ocean should do analysis. Where does it come from? And if it happens to be largely from the informal sector, then we are definitely willing to participate. But somewhere you have to get the governments along and point that out to them.
Great. Yeah, I thank you, Shekhar, for that. I think you've also brought in the importance of the role of the government and also what corporations are doing, setting targets, participating in recycling, and then also participating in more wider stakeholder collaboration, which is all fantastic. Just a follow up on that is, with setting targets right now, there's so many companies setting targets, and then there's a concern about greenwashing. How do you communicate to consumers, to the public, that your efforts are genuine?
Well, you're right. There is a lot of, and rightly so, some consumers believe that, some corporations may not be as sincere. But in our case, we have set clear targets and we are willing to pay the cost and deliver the algorithm for all our stakeholders, including employees, shareholders, and the customers. So, for example, next year, 5% of our bottles in Vietnam are going to be using recycled plastic. Now, the way the industry stands today, the cost of recycled plastic in Asia is roughly 2x of your regular virgin resin. So we are still going ahead with it because we believe that over time, as more and more companies like ours get into recycled PET, which is incidentally the most efficient way, one of the most efficient packagings to recycle, like aluminium, we believe that there'll be a whole value chain of suppliers created. Today, the costs are too high because there isn't enough supply. But as more and more corporations like ours participate in this, and the consumer sort of expects that, okay, a good brand would be progressing very rapidly towards using recycled plastic, then we believe that the cost would also come down and come down to a reasonable premium versus where it is today. But we are taking definitely the first steps along with the industry peers. And the large corporations will always take the first step. The issue is the rest. That's where we need the government support to bring along the SMEs or the informal.
Absolutely. Great. I do want to touch on that. That's a really important point you raised. But before that, I just also want to go to Brooke to from your perspective, Brooke. What are you seeing companies doing? How are companies getting involved? What kind of targets are they setting, and what kind of strategies are they implementing to achieve those targets?
I think the action that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years has been really fundamental in the shift. Here in Australia, we introduced a series of national packaging targets, which is a great way to coalesce industry and government together around a common agenda, which we can all get behind. But it's a really important point that was just made, and that was, well, how do you communicate that to consumers and to the community and to other stakeholders? And this is where, there's some basic business principles here. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so it's really important that organisations like the one that I worked for, APCO, actually is an independent organisation that acts as a backbone organisation to help coordinate what is required to make this kind of paradigm shift in the way in which we do business, and that is to actually manage that in a strategic way. So when you have something like the national packaging targets, you have these 4 key targets that everyone's shooting towards, but then you need to measure the progress towards that. So if you have a target that's set for 2025, what becomes important is some kind of mechanism to measure that progress. So we have an annual reporting system, there's a framework, and so we report back on the performance across the system to all stakeholders in the packaging value chain. And it's really important because not only does it show that you're legitimately doing something, but it also shows what's working and what isn't working, because you'll try some things and they'll be successful, and some things won't. And it's really important to recognise that when you're on a journey and a transition like this to a circular economy, it's not a 5-minute job. It's a piece of work that will take many years to achieve, sometimes out to 2025, sometimes out to 2030. That's a very long period of time to hold the attention of a very diverse stakeholder group and really ensure that engagement is effective and efficient. And to do that, you need to be showing the progress incrementally over that period of time. So being able to manage that is really fundamental in terms of measuring the system performance and clearly communicating that to a whole range of stakeholders.
That's an interesting point. I think, yes, measuring performance is really important. And I want to combine that comment with what Shekhar said earlier as well about bringing small and medium-sized businesses into the fold, increasing their level of action on issues like this. And so, Kim, I want to turn to you with a question about this, that, what kind of support do you think small and medium-sized businesses need? What kind of government policies can be put in place, or government efforts can be put in place to support that?
Thanks, Melanie. I totally agree with the point that Shekhar made, that the big companies lead because they have the capacities and the financial wherewithal to lead, and then the smaller companies and the SMEs should come along, right? And the challenge, as you said, is the informal sector, right? I think so. What we're doing here at the World Bank Group, so we have partners in our World Bank colleagues as well, who are working with the ASEAN governments to develop policies on and standards for collection. First of all, it starts with the collection of the waste, and then the sorting, as well as limits on how much plastic can be sent to a landfill or to incinerators. And it is a long journey, as Brooke said. It takes time because trying to have a unified standard across a country is difficult because you have different municipalities and provinces who have different objectives and priorities. And so that's very much work in progress for us at the bank. And also, I think for private sector, right, providing some incentives for R&D into new technologies for recycling, providing them with roadmaps on or clarity on how the government is moving in which direction, right? Whether it's approving recycled plastic for consumable products or whether it's setting particular standards for packaging material, I think is very helpful because we do see up to $9 billion of investment opportunities for the private sector in those 4 countries I mentioned, just from recycled plastic. So I think once there's clarity, I think the investments and the interest in investing will come.
Sure. And do you mean that even for small and medium-sized businesses? So, if you set plastic limits that to landfill, or if you clarify the standards for packaging, will that also help small and medium-sized businesses come into it? Or is there like a financing element that, to really increase support for them?
I think it has to be done at scale at first, Melanie. I think because right now there is no bankable project, or at least there's very few bankable projects in the space. So I think the first few ventures that come out will have to be at commercial scale. And once the technologies become more mainstream, then there will be more opportunities for SME type solutions.
Sure. Okay, great. Brooke, I want to come back to you about stakeholder engagement. Again, even what Kim said, you have to work with so many different municipalities, to work with so many different organizations to make this possible. There are some really interesting examples. In Australia, Nestle co-developed recycled packaging for their Kit Kat bar. Ains Pack, Plastic Pact also is bringing together about 100 organizations. Can you tell us a little bit more about how these alliances are working in practice?
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the most important things. And Kim was just touching on the SMEs, and Shekhar mentioned about big businesses leading out. The reality is that you're talking about a system change that we're trying to achieve here. To do that, you must engage businesses that are tiny little micro businesses, right up to big, billion-dollar businesses, and they have very different resourcing capabilities, very different, capacities to do work. And so you have to engage with them in a very particular way. So you do very much have to lead from the front with the large businesses. And the great thing about that is it sets the example that you can then also push through to SME businesses and really then provide them with the insights to participate in the work rather than leading it. But I think, what's been really exciting about some of the projects that you've mentioned just now is the diversity of the stakeholders. We're seeing what I think is probably the more innovative thing. People tend to focus on technology. What I think is actually the real innovation in the plastic space is the business model innovation, and it's based around social innovation. You're seeing waste companies in partnership with a packaging company and a beverage company creating infrastructure to manage plastic packaging, recovery and collection of plastic packaging. I mean, that's phenomenal. These are industry sectors that have traditionally worked, very much in silo from each other. And yet, there's an example we were talking about earlier today where we've got Coca-Cola, Asahi Beverages, Packed Packaging Group, and Cleanaway, which is a waste and recycling company, all, partners in developing a key piece of infrastructure for the collection and reprocessing of plastic here in Australia. That's an incredible thing. And if you talk about the work that you mentioned from Nestle, when you look across that is a food and beverage company. It's a waste and recycling company. There's logistics. There is a whole bunch of brand owners and different types of very diverse businesses that are coming together in very unique private and public partnerships to really drive and fill those gaps in infrastructure and capacity that's needed to meet the targets around collecting more plastic packaging and reprocessing it and getting it back into end markets.
Great. Brooke, I think that's a really perfect segue into our next section, focusing a little bit more on building and investing in the waste management system itself. And just to, again, maybe build on what Brooke has said, but when we're thinking about building a waste management system, and Kim, I'll come to you on this one, what are the key differentiating factors that investors, that other stakeholders in this value chain need to consider when expanding waste management capacity and enhancing the system as a whole in Asia Pacific, bearing in mind the fragmented system or the involvement of informal waste pickers. Can you comment on that a little bit, Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I think it all starts with clarity of where this is going, right? I think if there are clear standards on what can be done with the waste, I come back to the first point I said at the beginning of the conversation, is changing the perception that there is value in waste, and that we could recycle with the right technologies and so on. So once you provide that clarity, and then you have the standards on what can be recycled and what products, what category of products can use recycled plastic, and limitations on plastic packaging, for instance, or limitations on single-use plastic, which some countries have rolled out. So once you have that clarity, our experience is that the private sector will follow through very, very quickly. And then you will see, a unified or integrated system-wide approach, as I think the other two speakers have alluded to as well, as one of the key ingredients for, making sure that there is a waste management infrastructure that works, right? And that can really make a difference with the plastic problem.
Thank you, Kim. I want to turn to Shekhar now, just about, again, what Suntory is doing in this space. You already talked a little bit about the flake to preform technology. So clearly Suntory is investing in recycling technology itself. So you've talked about the technology, but what is, why is Suntory making this investment? And what are some of the factors you considered when you were making this investment?
Yeah, so, see, the flake to preform technology we invested a few years ago in Japan. It's now pretty successful. Our next step is to get it to Asia. And the reason we invested in this technology, our R&D has driven developing the whole platform itself, is because it's much, much, much simpler to execute. If you can segregate the collected waste, then you're able to convert it to preforms without too much chemical intervention, which was the whole objective, that we want to be in a position to be able to recycle and to be able to fit the standards that's set by various governments, so that the same plastic can be reused to make a beverage again. So that was one of the key drivers of that. Apart from that, the PRO initiative, unfortunately, we started it 3 years ago because of COVID. The whole thing got stuck. But in Vietnam, all 10 of us have got together, large multinationals, including some large local players. There's Suntory, there's PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Nestle, everyone. And we have agreed to seed fund this organization to start this massive recycling. Exactly to Kim's point, the first step is there is value in plastic for sure. As long as you can have a sustainable recycling, business model, there'll be actually enough these countries should be able to recycle, and there'll always be some use for this recycled plastic. A good example is the South Africa EPR. At least in our industry, South Africa has turned out to be one of the best recyclers of packaging material for beverages. And initially it starts off, companies like ours need to provide the seed funding, but after a certain amount of time, it will become self-sustaining once you get it to scale.
Okay, that's fantastic. And you also talking about challenges with navigating food regulation or food safety regulation, because some regulation does not allow mechanically recycled content to be used for food packaging or for food grade packaging. So is that how are you navigating that, Shekhar?
No, most regulations do allow you to. There is some countries which don't allow you to use any recycled plastic to make a beverage. And so we are, along with a PR organization in Thailand, we are lobbying the government, and we hope by next year they would agree. Obviously, even the physically recycled or whether it's chemically recycled, it has to meet certain standards before it is allowed. But in some countries like Thailand, for example, it is not allowed. So now we, along with all our industry players, have petitioned the government, and they're seriously considering it, because in the rest of Southeast Asia, as long as the recycled plastic meets certain standards, then you're allowed to use it again. So I think the Thai government is very, very open, and we expect by next year, though we are still starting the PRO and the recycling exercise, but we are hoping by next year the regulations will also change there.
Great. So it's great to see Suntory, involved in these recycling initiatives and investing in it as well, and investing in the technologies that are well established. I think there's a host of emerging technologies as well. You mentioned them, some chemical recycling technologies as well that are coming into play. Economist Impact has published a piece of research assessing some of these technologies, comparing them with the established mechanical approaches. Brooke, I know you're involved, or your organization's involved in a trial in advanced recycling. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and some of the motivations to explore that and understand that technology better?
Absolutely. So we're currently working on a pilot project which is looking at advanced recycling as a solution for plastic automotive oil containers. So hazardous material, very messy, very difficult to deal with. And when you are talking about advanced recycling or chemical recycling, that's generally the kind of material stream that you're looking for. If you've got a nice clean PET, PP or a HDPE stream, you're going to put it through mechanical recycling. It's really that technology is really mature, very effective and efficient. But if you're talking about flexibles or soft plastic materials or packaging that has contained hazardous or very difficult to remove residues, then you're going to look at something like chemical recycling as an alternative. The challenge with chemical recycling goes back to something that Kim touched on before, and that is the commerciality of some of these technologies at scale. And that's the challenge right now. There's a lot of, it's a bit of a, hot topic and a bit exciting. It's something bright and new and shiny. The reality of it is getting it to commercial scale is the challenge, but it's part of a very important part of the conversation around what are some of the solutions that we need to know more about going forward. I think one of the things that gets kind of lost in this is we look at something like advanced recycling which is a chemical solution, when another really key part of this is also looking at reuse systems, looking at the redesign of packaging, reduction of these materials. There's a whole slew of alternatives here, and it's not a single solution. And quite often somebody's, wanting to find the silver bullet solution, and there is really no silver bullet here. It is going to be a combination of mechanical, chemical, advanced, reuse, to really address the plastic packaging issues globally, not just in our region, but globally. It's a very big challenge. And I think, when we talk about innovation, again, it's really about that social innovation of how we can collaborate and work collectively together in the public and private sphere across industry and government to really address these issues in a collective way, because it is about a system change, which really requires everybody to do a little bit of something.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. Just a follow-up question. Who's financing the trial? How are you putting together funding for this?
So that particular trial is funded by a combination of government and industry. So there's some government funding that's gone into that, and then some industry participants who are also contributing to that piece of work.
Okay, perfect. That's very interesting, again, to see a lot of stakeholders coming together to support this financially as well. I want to get into some of these financing elements. We are running out of time. It's such a broad topic, and there's so many different solutions that we could discuss, but I want to keep it a little bit more focused. So, Kim, I'll come to you to delve a little deeper into some of the blue financing instruments that are now available, that are being developed. Can you tell us what the latest developments are in the space, particularly those most relevant and those can be easily adopted in Asia Pacific?
Sure, thanks, Melanie. So I think we are at the World Bank Group are looking at blue loans and blue bonds. So last year we issued our first blue loan to Indorama Ventures of Thailand. Indorama is one of the largest auto manufacturers, and we gave them a $300 million loan to expand their PET bottle recycling capacity. So by 2025, they will be able to recycle up to 50 billion bottles per year. And I think that's going to help remove some of these plastic that's going to make its way to the ocean otherwise. We're also working on our blue bond taxonomy, because we think the blue bond category as an asset class is still very nascent. It is a subset of the green bonds, but the blue bonds are specifically targeted towards the marine ecosystem. And so once we have that up and running, we will be able to anchor blue bond issuances in the capital markets throughout Asia. So Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, in one of those big markets, that would be feasible. We're also working with our infrastructure group, who would work with municipalities. And the ones that are of sufficient credit standing, we could help those municipalities issue blue bonds to help them with, cleaning up the rivers or cleaning up waterways and plastic recycling programs. So those are some of the initiatives we have. We are working with several financial institutions throughout the region as well to help them blue their portfolio. So companies that meet certain criteria would be eligible for these blue bonds from us. And of course, a new category of financing will be the sustainability linked bonds. So any one of the SDG goals would be eligible for a sustainability linked bond as one of the KPI or the triggers for the pricing of that bond. So very interesting and innovative space, Melanie, very exciting, but more to come.
Absolutely, and it's very interesting to see the breadth of solutions that are being developed. Just a quick follow-up on the sustainability-linked bond and the blue bond. What is the main difference there between the two? Is it one the latter rather is narrowly focused on ocean-related projects?
So with the sustainability-linked bond, it allows the borrower who's not quite there. So, for instance, I'll bring up a recent issuance that we did. It's not in the marine plastic space, but it's in the energy space. So we enabled a energy solutions provider who's not quite green. So it's a portfolio of brown assets to issue a sustainability-linked bond, meaning this borrower is accessing the capital markets to get financing to green the portfolio. And the reason we call it a sustainability-linked bond is because there is a KPI. So the borrower would have to achieve certain milestones in order for that spread adjustment to happen. With a blue bond, you don't have those spread adjustments. It's just the borrower borrows the money to undertake a specific, in this case, blue or marine-friendly investment, and the spread stays the same throughout the life of the bond.
Perfect. That's a fantastic explanation. Thank you for clarifying that, Kim. I want to come to Shekhar, perhaps for one of our final questions. We are coming very close to the end of our time here. Shekhar, again, we want to mobilize the private sector, get more private sector action. It's great to see the work that Santori is doing. How should companies such as yours think about this issue, and how can they make the financial and business case to really start investing in collection, in recycling? Some of it, of course, is in response to regulation. But what's the benefit now? There is a benefit to private sector companies. What is the benefit? How would you explain that? And how should other companies sort of follow in these footsteps?
I think, the initiative we have started in Vietnam, there is actually no regulation in Vietnam as of now on recycling. The reason we got together with all large players and started this is, it's much better for the private sector to take the initiative. But we also believe that if we are able to build scale in this, the costs become more moderated. So for a large organization like ours and let's say 10 other like-minded companies, what we should be willing to do, and we are willing to do, is you agree to the seed capital, let's say, or the seed expenses, whatever you want to call it, for the first 5 years to make it viable. But that's the most difficult part. Once you build up scale and the recycling starts taking place, then people would invest. We are also we are partnering with companies which are going to then process the recycled plastic or the collected plastic. So we believe that's the role of large organizations in a particular market. We should be at the forefront, agree to seed fund for a certain period of time to make it financially viable. And we are actually modeling after what happened in South Africa, which was initiated by one big beverage player. And the whole thing is now completely self-sustaining. But someone has to large organizations have to put the money down for let's say, the first 4 or 5 years for it to build scale. Then, of course, you'll get government support. And obviously, the government is fully supporting us. But right now, it's purely funded by the whole PRO organization and all the companies which participate in that. So
That's
fantastic.
That's
the real role for large organizations.
Great. And great to see that you are acknowledging that companies do need to be at the forefront of this, and help lead the solutions on this issue. We've come to the end of our discussion. It's been a really fantastic discussion with really concrete examples and stories of initiatives in the region. I know I could go on discussing this for much longer, but unfortunately, we have to bring this session to a close. We've had great insight on the importance of the issue, that it affects the lives and livelihoods of people, and some of the interesting tangible ways in which corporations get involved, setting targets, getting involved in recycling, and also involved with other stakeholders to collectively move this together. There was a really interesting point made about the business model innovation that we're seeing, the diversity of stakeholders that are coming together in terms of partnerships to craft the right solutions for this, whether it's plastic producers with consumer goods companies, with policymakers all coming together to find a solution for this. At the heart of this will be a shift in perception that there is value even in the flexibles, even in the small wrappers and packaging that is not always collected. So there is value in that plastic waste once it's collected. And hopefully that will drive some more private sector interest in this. Part of that is scaling up not just established mechanical processes, which should be the first port of call, but also exploring advanced recycling technologies, which could potentially more effectively process the flexibles and other soft packaging. Bringing those technologies to scale will be a challenge, but probably an exciting part of this industry. And once again, I think bringing together all of the parties, seeing private sector interest and leadership on this is important, and will continue to keep this exciting. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for their wonderful insights. Thank you to our audience for your time. Please stay tuned for our next session. Is extended producer responsibility the trigger for systemic change?